can speak for the collective we because I can't. But I was thinking about, because I have an opinion, about how I think we have been bamboozled about what the environmental story is of this country. We have been bamboozled because a lot of people have been left out. So I love movies. And I decided to rewatch the movie Far and Away with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. You're probably like, what does that have to do with anything? I'm gonna tell you. I watched that movie, mostly not because of Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman so much, but the last 20 minutes of the movie for me is incredibly powerful because it actually gives you some idea of what the Homestead Act, what it must have looked like in 1862 when European immigrants came over here and the government said, you know, okay, here's what we're gonna do. The gun's gonna go off at midnight. You can run out, you can put your stake down, you can get 100 acres just like that, it's yours for free. All you have to do is stay on it for 5 years. You stay on it for 5 years, you build a house, you farm, you manage to survive that, and after 5 years, it's free and clear, it is yours, you own it. That's incredible to me. That's incredible to think about. We can't do anything like that anymore, anywhere. That's all, and people die trying to do it. People fought each other for trying to do it. And that is hard-ass work, excuse my French, because it's isolating work. I can only imagine what it must have been like for many of those immigrants who came over and got that piece of land and stayed on it and died because they were 100 miles from their nearest neighbor, what that must have been like. So I take nothing away from that. I love watching that scene because I'm watching people in wagons and horses and running, trying to get their piece of land, the best, what they thought was the best piece of land for themselves. And then I thought about who lived on that piece of land before they got there. Right, and who had to be moved. Don't start talking to me about the Trail of Tears and all the American Indians who had to be removed, who died from that land that they lived on. And then I started thinking about, you know, in 1865, when enslaved Africans were freed, were given 400,000 acres, and then had it all taken away. Because a lot of white plantation owners got scared. I mean, and, you know, I have some small amount of empathy and understanding for that because they understood that land is political power, it's economic power. Holy crap, what's gonna happen if we give 400,000 acres to people that we've enslaved? What's gonna happen? All that land was taken away. Some of those people said, there were some people in Congress who said, well, hey, why don't we let them participate in the Homestead Act? But other people shot it down. So they were not allowed to participate. This is all happening at the exact same time. European immigrants are running out, getting free plots of land to grow, make their own, do what it is they want. American Indians are removed from their land and being put on the least worst land. And enslaved Africans are being told you can't have any land at all, forget it. Okay, this is where we began as a country. And it's hard for us to stand in it, but it's the truth of it. And when I start thinking about the environmental movement, I start to see where it starts to disconnect for different groups of people, just the legacy of that over time. Not just about economic power and political power, but also the power of belonging, just what it means to feel like you belong somewhere, right? And this country is trying to build an image of itself, say who it is and what it is as a country. What does that mean? I'm looking at the time going, oh no, they're not getting out, lock the doors now. Second chapter is Jungle Fever. And I always put up these two images. Right? I start off with images. So images for me are really, really important. We often think of images as being somewhat benign, but think about how powerful an image is. You don't even need any words. And I know there's a lot of writers in the room, and I'm not dissing words at all, but just the image. So LeBron James was the first African-American man ever to be on the cover of Vogue magazine with Gisele Bündchen, the model. And a lot of black folks went crazy when they saw this image because this is from 1917, right down to the color of her dress. And the reason why so many black people, including myself, got upset is because there's a history in this country of black and brown people being associated with the primitive. This idea of being primitive and being natural is not the thing that some of us think it is now. Like we're like, yeah, I'm back to nature. You know, black people in this country have been told we've always been closer to, therefore are less evolved and aren't as close to God as white people are. What's interesting for me about the people in Vogue magazine, they were shown this and they said they didn't know anything about it. And for me, that just can't be true. I'm sorry, that just can't be true. But even if it is, that's not an excuse because it says something about their consciousness and lack of awareness about this. So I'm interested in that. Also in this chapter, I talk about in 1964, we had another two of our most powerful pieces of legislation take place. The Wilderness Act and the Civil Rights Act in the same year. but these two groups of people never talk to each other. The work that both these groups of people were doing were very important, but if you look closely at the wording, it's really interesting to me in the Wilderness Act that talks about the primitive and keeping places this way, and that they're open for all people. In 1964, if you were black, how many places in this country could you go to safely, right? It's so interesting to me. So I'm not dissing Van Nuys or any of the men who sat down to write the Wilderness Act. I think it's incredibly powerful and thoughtful and deep and disconnected from the reality of a whole lot of other people. And I want to say that within the Civil Rights Act, and they had the things that they were focused on. Thank God. Thank God for me. I wouldn't be standing up here as I am right now if it wasn't for the Civil Rights Act. And also not really talking about the environment either, giving the environment, nature, its just due, because we all need it to survive. I don't care what color our skin is, right? Ooh, I'm getting worked up now. The other thing I want to say about jungle fever is, let me just say this first. So one of the things I talk about is the ways in which black and brown people were treated as kind of primitive. And there's a lot of stories about this, and one of the ones that really moved me was a story of Odabanga and how he was brought over, I believe it's, I want to say 1906, but I may get my year wrong. He was found in Africa. He was brought over. The Museum of Natural History in New York, which is my favorite museum, put him on display. And they didn't think enough of the public could see him, so they put him in the primate exhibit in the Bronx Zoo so that people could come see him until there was enough of an outcry and he was taken out. Unfortunately, there are multiple stories like this of Native people, of African peoples that were treated this way. Also, the eugenics movement, which a lot of the people in the big environmental organizations don't want you to remember that part of their legacy, because again, it was also about this idea of purity and linking conservation with national unity and purity. And so all of this was sort of rolled up in there. People are flawed. Everyone is flawed. And for me, a lot of what's flawed is embedded in these mission statements there. And the people that have come along today don't always realize that because they've come in with really good intentions. But for me, I get that, but I also want to say there's a legacy underneath that, and there's a responsibility to really learn about that and address what that is. At least I feel that's true. The final thing that I want to say about that is a story that a friend of mine who's Canadian found and sent it to me, that somewhere, I guess it had to be late 50s or early 60s, there was a white professor out of Boston who wanted to take an African-American couple who were friends of his to a park in Canada to take a break, to relax, to write, all those things that Van Nuys talks about as being important in the Wilderness Act and saying that they could come and have spiritual renewal. But he wrote the people who ran, it was Fundy Bay National Park in Canada, just to say, you know, because this is the time, a lot of Americans come there. He said they're African-American, they're really cultured, they have, you know, degrees, please, I just want them to be treated respectfully. And the guy wrote them back and said, I'm sorry, we get a lot of American visitors here, I really can't promise that for you. The couple was Dr. Martin Luther King and his wife, Coretta Scott King. So they could not even leave this country, go to our neighbors, and go to a national park and relax at that time. I talk a lot about, in 40 Acres and a Mule, the power of memory, because what I found in a lot of black people I talk to across the country, especially those over 40 and 50, that memory is really powerful, and memory is also the truth that they use to decide for themselves where they could go, who they could be, where they could feel safe, where they could fully show up and be who they are. This had a lot to do with everything from the Tuskegee experiments and all the ways that black people have historically, collectively been treated poorly. There's not really any nice way for me to say it. And so memory becomes a really powerful motivation. Also, it stays with people. A lot of people I met who never knew anyone who was lynched, when I would talk about going to the woods, often brought that up, the fear of the woods. And our people got lynched in the woods, and we've got to be afraid of the two-legged animal, not the four-legged animal. And this doesn't mean that the people with, these could be people with college educations in all different parts of the country. The one thing they had in common is that they're black. And often just these concerns, and sometimes it was said with a sense of humor, and sometimes it wasn't. When I was living here in 2005, I finally got my parents to come here, which was a huge big deal, because I never get them to visit me anywhere. And I took my father to Martin Luther King National Park, had to do it. And I don't know if it's changed over the years, but there used to be this diorama when you go in the visitor center, and there's all the images from the 40s and 50s, and the sounds coming over the speaker, and you know the replica of the jail cell that Dr. King was in, and sort of people kind of marching like this. So you're really getting the feeling of this. And I'm standing with my dad in front of one of these exhibits. Now my dad, You know, my dad's full name is Henry Lee Finney, just to give you some idea. And he was so upset with the name Lee. He said, Lee's got to be after Robert E. Lee. I just can't hold that anymore, so I'm going to have it legally changed. So about 10, 15 years ago, he had it legally changed. So his name is now Henry X. Finney. So I'm standing with my dad, who the only emotion he can get angry, but he's not, you know, he generally doesn't like to show any vulnerability, and he suddenly grabs my arm. And I thought he was having a heart attack, because it was the only thing I could imagine. I saw him blanch. It just happened so quickly, and I was like, Dad, are you okay? And then he giggled, which is just, my father doesn't giggle, but he did in a kind of nervous way. And he said, you know, he had looked up, and he'd seen a replica of a sign that said, for whites only. And he said, I saw that sign, and for a moment, I thought we weren't supposed to be here. His memory had flashed back that fast. So the power of memory to sit, I think it can do it individually and personally for us. I think it happens collectively for us as well. Yeah. So one of the greatest blessings I've had in doing this work and continuing to do this work is some of the amazing, 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 amazing people that I met and their stories. And so one of them that I want to tell you about right now, because memory was something that was a real motivation for her work. Is there anyone in this room who's heard of the Beach Lady, Maureen Betch? We got a couple, that's good. Maureen would be happy. So Maureen grew up on Amelia Island, which is right off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Her sister is really well known, Dr. Janetta Cole. Her great-grandfather was A.L. Lewis. A.L. Lewis, in the 40s and 50s, was the only man. He had the first life insurance company in Jacksonville, black or white, and he made a lot of money. In the 40s, black people could not go to the beach in Florida. So he decided he was going to buy a beach so that black people could not only go to the beach, but they could live on the beach as well. So he bought that beach, and he called it American Beach. Strip of beach. You had janitors living next door to judges on that beach, sand dunes, maritime forest, really beautiful on Amelia Island. So Maureen grew up, in terms of economic privilege, she grew up in it. She talks about playing out there on the beach and just how it made her feel. She went to Oberlin College, to conservatory, to become an opera singer. Then she took off for Germany, and she was there, and she had some success for years. But around the 70s, she decided to come back to the United States. She got really interested in environmental causes. She first supported a scientist who was studying the monarch butterfly. She was his patron for a while, and then she was supporting groups who were doing work with pygmy communities in Africa. But when she came back home, American Beach, think about it. It's a strip of beautiful beach. On Amelia Island, you have Fernandina Island, which is kind of a resort. And then you have something called Amelia Island Plantation. Yes, they calling it Amelia Island Plantation. Golf courses, resort. And developers were looking at that strip of beach, American Beach, and saying, oh, baby, it is beautiful. And she was like, oh, no, I don't think so. And for her, it was about two things. It was about protecting that beach, that natural beauty, that ecology, but it was also about protecting that African-American history and memory, and that these two things were intricately linked. And she turned everything out. So she gave away all of her wealth, folks. $750,000. She gave away the house that she lived in. She lived on a chaise lounge on the beach. She gave it all away so that she could be clear, she could be free, and she could be clear about what it is she needed to do, which was protect this beach. One of the stories I like to tell about Maureen, so Maureen had dreadlocks all the way down to the floor. What she's holding in her hand with buttons on it is her hair. It's all that long, right? She would go to civic meetings, and she would stand in the back, and she'd be like, I pledge of allegiance to the flag, to the United States of America, and to the republic for which we stand, one nation, under God, indivisible. And then she'd shout out, for all white folks who got money. She'd get their attention. Maureen managed to get the National Park Service to protect 8.2, I think, acres of the sand dunes. American Beach is now a National Historic Site. That's also how she became known as the Beach Lady, because Janetta Cole bought her a trailer to move into. She kind of turned that into a little archive, and then she eventually moved into a small apartment. This became her work. One of those things, I got to meet Maureen through sheer luck and serendipity, and Maureen said to me, I am the freest person you will ever meet.